All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining Green Drinks Beaufort for our final get together for the year. We've done a couple of these virtual meetings, and hopefully soon we can cheers a beer together again soon. So just a couple quick housekeeping items. My name's Kayla Romain. I'm the Director of Stewardship at the Beaufort County Open Land Trust and on the steering committee of the Green Drinks program. And tonight we have a couple fabulous guests that are going to be speaking to you from the Nature Conservancy. So I hope you're excited, and I know I sure am. So the presentation is going to last about 30 minutes, and then it'll be followed by a Q&A. If you have any questions during the chat, feel free to, or during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. If you'll look up in the right-hand corner of your screen where it says View and click that to switch to speaker mode, it will be your best viewing presentation for your end. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Williams from the Nature Conservancy to get this show on the road. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Kayla, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us and to learn more about what the Nature Conservancy is doing in South Carolina, and also to meet our new executive director, Dale. We're also going to do Q&A through the chat. So if you have a question, as Taylor mentioned during the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and enter it in the chat so you don't forget. And whenever we get to the Q&A portion, we'll actually be reading questions through the chat. So my name's Matt Williams. I work out of the Mount Pleasant office for the Nature Conservancy of South Carolina. And some of you I know. I spent quite a bit of time before the pandemic. I spent quite a bit of time on the road traveling down to Beaufort County and visiting with Nature Conservancy friends. Of course, that looks a lot different now. We're all working from home, but 2020 has been a real year of impact for the Nature Conservancy. We've got a lot of great projects underway and a lot of great projects that we're teeing up as well. A lot of you probably already get our publications, but just a few quick things about the Nature Conservancy. We've been working here in South Carolina since 1969. We partnered on a project to protect a place called Four Hole Swamp, which is now called Bidler Forest. And that, of course, was a partnership with the Audubon Society. If you're driving up I-26 towards Columbia, you'll pass signs that say Bidler Forest. And it's a beautiful bottomland hardwood swamp system that drains into the Edisto, home to migratory birds and beautiful old cypress trees. So I recommend you visiting sometime. Since 1969, we've protected about 400,000 acres all over the state of South Carolina. Globally, we're working in almost 80 countries, and we've now protected over 125 million acres of land. But today we're going to give you a snapshot of the work we're doing by going on the trail with Dale, our new state director. So it's our pleasure to introduce to you Dale Threatt-Taylor, who's our new state director. A little bit about Dale. She received her Bachelor of Science in Conservation from NC State, that's North Carolina State, and a Master of Environmental Management from Duke University. Her career began as a soil conservationist with the United States Department of Agriculture and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Later, she joined the Wake Soil and Water Conservation District. This year, Dale made history when she was elected to serve as chair of the Soil and Water Conservation Society's National Board of Directors. She's received many awards throughout her career, but one caught her by surprise, the Order of the Longleaf Pine from North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper for her dedicated work in conservation. We've all enjoyed getting to know Dale this year, and although she's joined us during a global pandemic and extraordinary circumstances, her leadership and teamwork and her passion for conservation are very apparent. So I want to say welcome to Dale. And also want to say welcome to David Bishop, who's on this call. Many of you know David. David is our Coastal and Midlands Conservation Director. On the left there, you'll see what we refer to as pillars. These are the things that we're working on in the state of South Carolina. As I mentioned, we do a lot of land protection, and oftentimes when I'm visiting with Nature Conservancy friends, I'll ask them, what do you think of when you think of the Nature Conservancy? And more often than not, people say, I think of conservation easements, or I think of your preserves, or I think of Nature Conservancy buying land. And that's a fair answer. But years ago, we realized that we needed to diversify our approach to conservation if we were going to make the biggest impact. So we're now focusing on restoring our native forest, securing fresh drinking water, addressing climate change, helping communities adapt to climate change, and to create resilience, and also to sustain our fisheries. So Dale, this is a great opportunity to talk about your first forays into nature.
Thank you, Matt. Well, and I appreciate this opportunity to share my journey across South Carolina. As Matt said, it was an unusual year, but we found any reason, any opportunity to get outside. So I would like to start where everything should start, which is on the water. One of my first joys was learning to kayak in South Carolina. Joy Brown, our Marine Program Manager, she's been helping me with this learning to kayak, and she had me out on intercoastal waterway. She had me in marshes and small creeks. Also in the Wando River. Now, and I have to tell everybody, this happens when you're not paying attention and you turn to the left real quick, or you turn to the right. Oh, look at the birds, or look at, because, you're a science geek and you flip that, you turn real quick, you're going to flip your kayak. And so, Matt, it's really good to know that my life vest works.
And you probably learned how to empty the water out of the kayak too.
I did. She not only taught me how to empty it out, get out to adjust my life vest, but we got back in and we continued on up the Wando, and on the way back, dolphins swam right past me. Nice. I'm thinking that's worth falling in the Wando River for. I may regret it in the future, but for right now, it was a wonderful experience. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to our first little adventure with Dale. Dale and I, early fall of this year, had the good fortune to go kayaking on the Black River with some TNC friends, and we paddled primarily through the Nature Conservancy's Black River Preserve, which is about 1,700 acres along the Black River. And for those of you that don't know the river, it starts up in Marion County, up in the upper coastal plain, and it winds its way towards the coast through Williamsburg and Georgetown County. It meets the PD very briefly before the PD spills into Winyah Bay. And we own 1,700 acres, as I said, and it's a river-based preserve. It's not a preserve that you can go walk on. You do need a kayak or a canoe or a boat to access the preserve, but it is a gorgeous place. And Dale, I'd love for you to share some of your thoughts on spending the day on the river.
I have to tell this story because of all the kayak trips I've been on. I think being on the Black River was probably one of the best ones, if not the best. Here we are, we're driving to a landing near Andrews, and we're headed to this spot downstream to leave our vehicles. And we drove 10 minutes back to where we would enter the water and launch. And you get these beautiful red kayaks, and we get into the water, we begin to paddle down the river, and and it's winding bends and curves in this beautiful river. We enjoyed 3 hours on the river. 10 minutes by land, y'all, and 3 hours on the river, which of course is a testament to the topography of the river, of course. And the river looks so dark. Of course, it's called the Black River, but it's actually very clear. Matt explained to me that the leaves fall in the water from the trees that overhang the banks, and it settles in and it gives the water this black tea look. So that was one of the things I had to learn. And then that's just the water. Every bend of the river held a surprise. You see these big cypress trees. I learned about knees. You see the Spanish moss hanging from the limbs. It was just great. And then you see all the beautiful wildflowers you could spot, on the edge of the banks. And, somebody in our group of kayakers would point up at this big, large cavity in the trees and start talking about wood duck nesting areas in the trees. But before you could look at that, all of a sudden, several white ibis surprised us and just took off, flock them, and right above us. So I guess in a way, they surprised us, but maybe we surprised them. We were probably the ones that, in their territory. And Matt, it felt so great to be one-on-one in nature. I thought we were in one of the most beautiful and peaceful settings there were.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things about kayaking on the Black River is that when you look over and you see a fellow kayaker, they always have a smile on their face, just sort of ear to ear.
I agree.
So we're going to play a short little video that'll give you some idea of what it's like to paddle along the river. And this is a video of a section of the river in Oxbow Lake called John's Lake that is a maze of cypress trees. So when you're back in John's Lake, we were just sort of getting into John's Lake here in this video. When you get further into it, it gets much tighter. You have to navigate between cypress stumps and old cypress trees and vines hanging down, and you can get lost back in John's Lake. So but thankfully there are wooden arrows that have been posted on the trees to kind of navigate you back and forth and back to the main part of the river.
And Matt, if you're not careful, you will also get a spider on your hat.
Oh, that's right.
Just saying.
I remember that. That was one of the first times that's the first time I ever heard, and the only time I've ever heard Dale scream.
Yeah.
So, David, we've got this great opportunity, and I know that you've been working on the Black River for years with land acquisitions, but why don't you tell the group about this potential new state park?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Black River is a hidden gem if you haven't been there. It's a really special place, but the Nature Conservancy has been working on the Black for a long time, working with a lot of our conservation partners, Ducks Unlimited, PD Land Trust, Low Country Land Trust, Open Space Institute, Butler Conservation Fund, on and on. There's a bunch of people that have done a lot of work on the Black River, where there's miles and miles of river frontage, 50,000 plus acres of protected land just in the scenic river stretch. So what you see there is that big green blob is a largely Nature Conservancy property on the south side of the river. You see that red piece, the Brooks track is a track we're adding to it. And you notice it fits right in next to our property on the left and some conservation property on the right. So it's really protecting both sides of this river, which is really exciting. And we have been working with state parks. This is very early, but we're starting to explore the concept of a linear-based state park where you can have multiple holdings throughout the river. You could take a day trip. You could just come for the day. You could go paddle for a few hours. You could paddle for several days. So we're looking at this really different experience to tie in from King Street, which you see up in Williamsburg County in the upper left, all the way to Rocky Point, and that's the county line that you see there that's hashed through the middle. So this is pretty exciting because it's a 75-mile stretch of scenic river, and as Dale said, this river it's not, if you drive it, it's not that far, but it is a windy little river, and it's an experience like no other. So we'll be really excited about that. It's going to take quite a while to get this going, but we're starting this process. So that's going to be a nice short drive, you know, for Beaufort. It could be a day trip or it could be a multiple day trip. So anyway, stay tuned for that. I think you'll start to hear more and more about that over the next few years.
Thank you, David. And we're closing on the Brooks Tract acquisition later this year. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that should be closed in the next few weeks. So this is over a mile of river frontage, 500 plus acres of some really old bottomland hardwood right on the river for sure.
Mm-hmm. Dale, you have any other thoughts about that day or?
Yeah, you know, Matt, I would love to tell everybody, I'm new to South Carolina and I'm new to terrain, and I should have been listening and learning. We're just not out for the fun of being in the kayaks. But I need to learn about the bottomland hardwood forest. I've got to learn about nesting, wildlife habitat as it relates to South Carolina, how the swallowtail kites need, which is such an important species, need our Black River Preserve. So I should have been listening, but I have to admit, y'all, the serenity of the place just took me away. You know, I should have been thinking about the carbon, but I wasn't thinking about people who were fishing along the banks. I wasn't thinking about the folks that were in the John boat. I wasn't thinking about how their lives were impacted by healthy fish in that water. I wasn't thinking about how for generations people floated down and used the Black River for transportation. I should have been thinking about those things. But honestly, I just want to confess at the time, I was just really enjoying being out there.
That's certainly understandable. It's a very special place. Well, we're going to continue on the trail with Dale, and we're going to head to the upstate of South Carolina, where the Nature Conservancy has been working since the late 70s on protecting land and also working with state parks. But the project we're going to highlight now is a project with the city of Greenville, where we work to protect 35,000 acres owned by the city of Greenville as part of their watershed. And this is one of the largest private conservation easements east of the Mississippi. We're very proud of that. But the Greenville watershed holds about 35 billion gallons of water, which is hard to fathom. Yeah. But it's a lot of water. And Dale, you mentioned the fish in the Black River and the importance of clean water whenever people are taking fish out of the river to eat. But, you know, with the Greenville watershed, we've got 500,000 people in the Greenville area that get their drinking water from these two reservoirs. And one more thing of note, and some bragging rights, often Greenville, the city of Greenville, gets rated the best drinking water in the country. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about your day in the watershed there with City of Greenville, our partners.
Oh, that'd be great. I have to tell, I'm going to change my shoes now. That's what I'm gonna call it. I want you to know that since joining the Nature Conservancy, I found that South Carolina has all these fantastic jewels, these beautiful locations that I didn't know about. And I'm being honest about that. I know people have been trying to describe to me, but it's such an understatement. And those of you who live in the Ace Basin, you know, when you see it, you know how beautiful. So I figured out about these places by my shoes. You see, I wear heels to meetings with my suits. I wear boots to the fields to look at projects. You know, I'm a conservationist, so I know boots. But since coming to South Carolina, I've had to up my game and make room in my shoe closet. Now I've got water shoes for the beach and shorelines. I've got mud boots for, well, mud. And I've got hiking boots for trails in the upstate. When we visited Greenville in the foothills area, it was such a contrast to the low country. But yet, to me, it was very connected. And let me explain what I mean. I fell in love with the low country, but it's that movement of water through the forest land in the upstate that has added to our work with TNC. Clean water is key to connecting people and nature. And, you know, I needed the experience of a hike with our partners in the city of Greenville Water. We hold an easement on about 30,000 acres in their watershed. We climbed up on what felt like the side of a mountain, y'all. we stood there at the top of this granitic outcrop, this granitic rock outcrop along a waterfall. And we talked about how the city's leaders way back, and Greenville's leaders had planned, and I think it was about the 1920s, they told me, I may have that wrong, but they purchased land to protect their watershed, to keep their water clean. Now, y'all, this is extremely visionary for, turn of the century, that we had leaders thinking about that. How many decades ago they knew how important protecting the watershed was for water quality. Later on, though, they found out that it wasn't really permanently protected. So they partnered with TNC South Carolina during our lifetime. They partnered with us to put conservation easements on the watershed for permanent protection. And we stood up there on this mountainside, y'all, and we talked about how this protected land still needs to be managed. As Matt said, it's drinking water for 500,000 people, and the Greenville Water helped introduce fire with controlled burns, and we were part of that. And that had not been something done in recent times, and it felt good because to bring fire back into the upstate is a new conservation practice, and we're kind of proud to be part of that. Pristine water in the upstate, it flows through these protected areas and eventually down to the low country. And that's what I meant by, from my perspective, it's connected. So yes, I love my low country, but I also love the upstate for that clean water.
Absolutely.
We had a lot of great conversations about this. And in a minute, he'll show you a picture of me with a crazy look on my face. And I need to tell y'all, that look right there is sincere. I was walking on a narrow log on the side of a mountain and over a waterfall. So yeah, that excitement, I'm thrilled to be in nature, but that is a real little nervous look. So that's my experience, man. I just want to thank you for letting me share that. But Greenville is that whole upstate area is just absolutely beautiful.
It really is. And it's a growing area too, as we all know. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the South, and protecting that water source is going to pay off big time. So we're going to launch a poll question now, and we invite you all to choose from the multiple choice, submit your answers, and then we'll give you all the correct answer here in a minute, in just a few seconds, actually. All right, so we're sharing the poll results. So the answer to the question, why is tracking salamanders so important to Greenville water? So salamanders breathe through their skin. If there's something wrong with the health of the forest, the population will decline. So, these places are important not only for people, for our drinking water, but also for our neighbors and wildlife, our salamanders. All right, we're going to venture back down to the coast of South Carolina to a place that's very near and dear to me. I grew up on the Santee Delta, which is just to the north of Cape Romain. I spent a lot of time in high school and middle school fishing, sometimes getting lost. The Cape Romain National Wildlife Refuge is massive. It's over 60,000 acres of salt marsh, creeks, bays, barrier islands, and it's owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It takes up 22 miles of coastline in the northern part of Charleston County. And the Nature Conservancy has been working with Fish and Wildlife for years to acquire parcels when they've come on the market and add into the wildlife refuge. But it's a home to many different species, lots of different bird life. It's estimated that 30% of the global population of oyster catchers spend part of the year in the Cape Romain National Wildlife Refuge. But not only have we been protecting land to add on to the refuge, but we've been doing some pretty interesting projects with living shorelines. So Dale, you got to spend a day in the McClellanville area with Joy Brown and some of our partners recently.
Yeah, it was a fabulous day in the fall. And if you're going to go out and go in the fall, from what I understand, you really don't want to be mosquito bait in the summertime. So, but we were out on the water. We didn't have big wakes. It was great. There wasn't a lot of boats. We had a fabulous time. We headed out to see a couple of the living shoreline project, oyster projects that we've installed. Joy often monitors these projects, and for us to get out and see some of the projects firsthand helped me understand the actual work. You can tell from my smile that I love an adventure, so I asked Joy to let me drive the boat. It was my first time driving a boat, big motorboat like that. We had 2 guests with us, and I'll tell you about in a minute, and I didn't even bother to turn to look, to see the look on the expression on their face when I asked to drive the boat. But I didn't fill up the boat, so I'm hoping Joy's gonna let me drive it again one day. So, but it was exhilarating, and just so you know, she didn't let me drive but a few seconds. Don't worry, 60 seconds at the most, maybe. But we'll work with our community partners. We asked the town mayor and the town administrator of Andrews to join us. Learning about living shorelines and oysters is fascinating to me. I don't come from a coastal area or a coastal environment, so I've been learning a lot, not only the science behind the importance of oysters, but how they support our fisheries, our coastal systems, our economy, how they filter the water. I'm still learning all of that. And I know those of you who live in the coastal area probably understand the importance of our marshes, how it protects the coastline. You understand the importance of the oysters for water quality. But our nature-based projects provide protection to our coastlines. They provide habitat. And so I was out there learning all this and trying to figure out how to walk in muck and walk in mud, and listening to Joy explain how the marsh had come out to meet where the projects were. In other areas, you could see where the erosion was continuing. I could stand in that water and feel the current pulling, and you realize, and I'm a science geek, and yes, I'm a natural resource conservationist, I'm a conservation leader, but you still got to feel it. You just got to stand there and feel it. So I put my new boots on, my mud boots on, and enjoy that. And I was just absolutely loving it. Just loving it, Matt. It was great.
Yeah, and this is a cool story because the town of Andrews, we mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Black River Preserve. So it's located inland in Georgetown County, and we're working with the town of Andrews to install some resilience projects to help the city with flooding that they've been experiencing from large rain events and the nearby Black River. And this was an opportunity to get the administrator and the mayor out to see another type of resilience project and to understand a little bit better how nature can benefit communities. So one thing you'll learn about the Nature Conservancy, and I've learned, and I've discovered this many times over, we always have a long-term strategic goal when we're doing projects like this. So with living shorelines, Dale mentioned those micro impacts that we're having on water quality and with habitat for finfish. And of course, the micro impact we're having of salt marsh restoring itself along the shoreline, and then that shoreline being protected from boat traffic and erosion. But the long-term strategy here is to work with DHEC to develop a living shoreline permit so that if a homeowner is experiencing shoreline loss, they can apply for a permit and build a living shoreline along their project, or along their property. And in a saltwater setting like you have down in Beaufort County, it's going to be typically very appropriate to build a living shoreline that will grow wild oysters, such as these projects we have behind the group there. And so with more and more people choosing to build these living shorelines, we're going to have more and more opportunities for wild oysters to grow and to make those impacts on our estuaries.
Right.
So Dale, these are places that you've gotten to visit this year. There's lots more to see in the state, as we all know. And one of the places that we've got on our list for you to visit is Groton, which is such an impactful project that David worked on and partners worked on, and directly impacts the people on this call.
Yeah, they're places. I've been to a lot of different places. We've shared a few, but there are certain sites that I really have high on my list as my next place to get out safely. And of course, Groton is one of them. Being on the Savannah River, just the sheer size alone is 21,000 acres, and it connects 125,000 acres of protected land. To me, that's outstanding. It's also one of the reasons why my boss, Michael Lifford, he's head of all the 10 states in the whole Southeast, he still talks about Groton all the time. So I just think that's simply amazing. I've been told, Matt, that this project was funded in part by the Beaufort Jasper Water and Sewer Authority. And for the first time, South Carolina Water Utility invested in private land protection. And I think that's a great model for other utilities. So yeah, I want to go to Groton real soon. I know we hold an easement on Groton. It requires a lot of stewardship work, a lot of ground management. In fact, both our preserves and the land we hold easements on, they have beautiful photographic photos, we get from them. People love to hike them and everything, but the work that goes on these places is intense. And so I guess I'm pausing to say, I am so grateful to the work that, our staff does. Everybody's so passionate about who put boots on the ground for us to do that. So, and David, I know Groton is near and dear to your heart. If you could tell a little bit more about Groton, I would appreciate it.
Sure. It seems like my internet's a little bit shaky, but you're right. The most exciting thing about this is you guys may never go to Groton, but it's protecting your drinking water. This was a high priority track upriver. We modeled the watershed about which tracks provide the greatest benefit for long-term water quality, just like the Greenville water story. And this is it. This is, like you said, there are 23 miles of river frontage. This one family has protected over 20,000 acres. It's phenomenal. And it's longleaf and woodpeckers and gopher tortoises and really how South Carolina used to look. Anyway, I'll give you something that's exciting. So Beaufort Jasper, and I think Ed Saxon, who used to be the GM, really kind of spearheaded this project, but it started with Dean Moss, who now is on our board and is also on this call. And these guys get it, and I think Beaufort gets it. That's why y'all have the really critical program, and Beaufort's a real leader in conservation, and people take note. And I'll tell you that I live in Aiken now, and a recent purchase by the city of Aiken, they just bought or about to buy a large tract of land that surrounds one of their reservoirs, and they took note of Beaufort's doing this. So you guys are really having an impact across the state. It's pretty exciting. It is a special place. If you ever drive up to Augusta or something like that, you go through Estill and hit off on Highway 3, you'll drive through the middle of it, the heart, and you'll know when you get there. It just opens up, and it'll feel very different from the rest of what you have been driving through. So beautiful place. It was a decade plus long project that I picked up from predecessors. So sometimes these things take a while.
Well, David, that's a testament to patience, your patience, and working with the family and staying after it. One of the things that always strikes me about going to Groton, and I've only been twice, but it feels like you're stepping back in time. And as you said, it's what South Carolina used to look like, but they have a fairly aggressive fire regime, I understand, and they have a lot of acreage to manage with fire, but they've been employing prescribed fire on this property for 100 years. And you can see the results. I mean, you have this beautiful open longleaf savanna, and proud to have that as one of our conservation easements. But as we mentioned earlier, the Nature Conservancy does a lot of work with restoring native forests throughout South Carolina. And that means we put a lot of boots on the ground every year to bring prescribed fire to the state. And Dale, you've had the opportunity to get out and see some of that work firsthand, I know.
Absolutely. It was thrilling. So not only did I have different shoes on again, but the entire outfit, of course, got changed. It was a wonderful experience. I must tell you, the respect I have for our fire crew. They don't just go out and say, hey, we're going to burn today. The science behind, everything from wind and the amount of storage, how it's mapped out, the moisture content, and much more that I can't even describe. But it was like all this work goes into making sure it's done correctly. So yeah. I appreciate the fact that they let me experience that also, so that I can understand. I knew as a conservationist the importance of fire, but some things you just really need to experience. And so it was a great day. By the way, I need to make it clear to everybody, I'm an NC State Wolfpack, and so my picture is pretty much, it's just an old habit. So
I like it. I thought you were doing the hook 'em horns at first. University of Texas. Joke. So Dale, I know you've been down to Beaufort for some meetings to visit with partners, but we haven't gotten you out on the water, and we want to talk about the project David and Dean Moss and partners worked on Port Royal Sound watershed mapping.
Yeah, it's on another must-do, very high on my list. The goal is to return to the Ace Basin in the Port Royal area. I definitely want to get out on the water in the Port Royal Sound. I recently grabbed my heels again and headed for a lunch meeting down in Beaufort. And I want to tell you, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I drove down Highway 17 through the Ace Basin. Simply indescribable beauty. I mean, I thought, how do we protect this? What do we need to do? What's going on? And when you're new, you can't keep a grasp of all the work that's going on. But I had such a nice peaceful drive and some of the most beautiful views and going over historic bridges. But I've got to learn more about our work in the Port Royal Sound watershed, with the analysis map. I know, well, in fact, you know what, rather than talking about the project, I think in GIS and all the work that went into it, I think I'll let David, you or Matt talk about, that project. I am thrilled because the concern on my mind was this is indescribable, but how do we help protect it? What partners do we work with? How do we do this?
Well, David, why don't you thank you, Dale. David, why don't you add just a few thoughts about this project and its importance?
Yeah, happy to.
And how it was brought together.
Sure. Well, a lot of the people on this call, and I haven't looked through all the participants, but Beaufort Land Trust, Taylor, Port Royal Sound Foundation, DNR, NOAA. We don't do anything in South Carolina without 10 partners in conservation, and we all work great together. I can tell you that this region, in my opinion, is really the most exciting conservation opportunity and risk on about the Atlantic seaboard. If I had a poll on this call, there's very few. How many of you are from Beaufort or Jasper County? I bet not many of your hands would go up, although this group might be more than many of them. It's a special place. Many people came here because they recognized how beautiful it was and how special it was, and it's been discovered. If you've been there longer than a minute, you've seen what's happening. All of a sudden, what's happening in Jasper County. It can be a little unnerving, I think, if you've been there a while. And I know, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of risk. And so what we did was take a lot of information, and what you're looking at is one data set. And basically the red areas are 30 meter by 30 meter squares of every bit of your watershed that identifies which areas are most important for conservation to protect water quality, which ones are likely to flood in the future because there's rising sea levels, which ones might flood on hurricanes. And so we use a science-based approach to decide where's the best place for us to invest limited conservation dollars. And this is not just T&C priorities, this is priorities sort of across the board. So we met right there at the Port Royal Sound Museum as you're going, over the river. And we came up with this. And so what's exciting is this was a few years ago. We're starting to see now Beaufort is updating their comprehensive plan. Jasper's starting to think about this stuff. They're starting to look at mirroring the Beaufort Rural and Critical Lands program to see if that's something they can do. We have the air station there that's really important to the economy, but also we need to protect not only just the immediate encroachment, but we want to protect their flight lines to go to the bombing ranges. And so all these things are kind of working together. And I think Beaufort really kind of gets it. And Jasper's they're starting to see, and they're starting to get it. So I think this is really exciting. I can tell you that your watershed and long-term water quality is not just what's happening immediately in Beaufort, but at some point Beaufort's going to have to think about maybe investing in Jasper or even Hampton or even Allendale, because all these things are upriver for you and all that's affecting your water quality. So if Jasper goes the wrong way, Beaufort will get all the pain and none of the gain. And so this is where we're starting to see the conversation shift. And this was a conversation you just couldn't have a few years ago. So to me, it's very exciting. It's very similar to how Beaufort's investing upstream in land protection, and even Georgia invested in South Carolina in land protection. So we're starting to see more regional thinking, which is really the only way we're going to get to where we need to get. So there's a lot more going on here. We've got an online story map. Maybe we could send that out to let you guys link to it and can kind of poke around and learn more if it's something that resonates with you. But anyway, this is going to keep going, and we're glad to have Kaylor and his team down there really carrying the flag for land conservation in that watershed.
Yeah, as we've said for years in conservation that watersheds and lines, they don't pay attention to the lines that humans draw on the map. So that was great, David. Thank you. Yeah. Well, Matt, for me, I want to thank everybody for coming on this journey with me. I'm going to take off any shoes I have right now and put on my slippers. I would love to meet you. I would love to get out in nature with you and include you on some of my journeys. And maybe we can plan for future walks together or hike together or get on a boat, Joy let us, and go out and check out some oyster castles. But so thank you so much for spending this time with me. We're going to do some question and answers, and we'll have a little bit more fun if you would like. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Dale, and thank you, David. We have a question here. Dale, what surprised you most about coming from North Carolina to South Carolina?
How honest do you want me to be? The honest answer is I didn't know what to expect. I knew it was a different terrain. I knew it was a different topography, but I thought it was similar enough. The biggest surprise, to answer your question, was the people. Had not worked with many South Carolinians, only a few in conservation, and they were, of course, delightful, but I didn't know any other South Carolinians. I'm pleasantly surprised, as I keep telling Pastor says, how are they treating you in South Carolina? I says, Pastor, these are the nicest people, just nice. They respect the land, they respect our work. So that's the biggest surprise, is I didn't know what to expect. And you don't when you go to a new place. And I've been blessed. South Carolinians has just been super nice to me, and the work is exciting. South Carolina, the Nature Conservancy, for those of you who don't know, the Nature Conservancy, as Matt explained, we're in 72 countries, and we're in all the states in the United States. And South Carolina had the reputation of really good conservation work. So I knew about that. And I kept thinking, don't go mess it up there, you know, go and enjoy it. And so I wanted to join, but you don't know the people, you don't know the owners, you don't know who the citizens are. And again, biggest surprise is not really a surprise, it's just a pleasant blessing. Great people, just great people in South Carolina.
Thank you, Dale. So we have a question here on eager to hear what people can do to help. And this is we can answer this in many different ways. I'm a fundraiser, so I think a very obvious way is to support our work. And there's nothing that we do here in South Carolina we can't accomplish anything without your support. So I'll say that very clearly. We enjoy working with our donors and getting to know them. So I'm happy to call any of you anytime. But David, I think this also offers an opportunity to talk about Beaufort County residents and their voice and looking where we might protect land in Beaufort County and Jasper County. I know we've had conversations before about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, you hear 6 degrees of separation, well, there's maybe 1.5 in Beaufort County. So I think everybody in this county is connected to somebody who is going to need some sort of education or influence at some point. And so I'll make a bold prediction. At some point, Beaufort County might vote to spend money in Jasper County to do something to accomplish Beaufort County's objectives. I think that's the future. I think that should be a decision the citizens make. And I think Beaufort County's proven that they think about this kind of stuff. So I think those are the type of things that might come down to just individual voting, just being educated, but also educating others. We're not quite sure where this is going to go yet, but I'm really optimistic about the region. You know, Jasper County is where I think the frontier is down there. So I do think there's, you know, less connections perhaps in Jasper County, but we got a friendly county council and administrator over there who start to think about these things too. So I think I would just say plug into our network and Beaufort Open Land Trust, Port Royal Sound Foundation, just stay abreast. And I think this group's probably more educated than most on these issues. And I think opportunities are going to rise.
Thank you. So we have a question of how successful are the newer oyster castles? And I don't believe that Joy is on this call, but I've spent some time building some of these oyster castle reefs, these living shorelines, and I've also done some monitoring being in the coastal office. One reef that I can think of in particular, so this question is about oyster castles, and these are, the best way to describe them would be to think of like a cinder block, but they're a little bit smaller, but they're sort of a perfect square, and they're shaped sort of like, if you remember making sandcastles on the beach with those plastic forms, and they're sort of that shape. They're heavy, they weigh about 30 pounds, and you stack them in place, and they sort of lock together like Lincoln logs might lock together. We installed a reef on the North Edisto in April of 2018. And oh, there's Joy. Joy can, if she's can get off mute, she can speak to this. But we installed it in April of 18, and by December of 2018, there were 3-inch oysters growing on that particular reef. Joy, I'm going to turn it over to you, the expert here.
You were doing great, Matt. You were doing great. Yeah, I was definitely thinking about our gold bug reef. That is a reef that we built in 2016. And that reef is on the intercoastal waterway between Mount Pleasant and Sullivan's by Gold Bug Island. And we've, just as an example, some of the great accomplishments we've seen on that is we saw 3-inch oysters in a year. That's kind of a basic size measurement, but that normally takes 2 or 3 years at least to accomplish. So really fast oyster growth, meaning a lot of food in the area for the oysters growing on the castles. And then the castles serving as that wave break for that reef base has really helped to support the marsh accretion that we're seeing. So it's reduced and basically stopped the erosion at the site. And we've seen a forward progression of the marsh vegetation 30 to 70 feet closer to the reef that's been built since 2016. And, I like to tell people, the oyster reef is like the icing, but the marsh is the cake. So it's really important that we are putting this long-term sustainable shoreline out there so that as our sea levels rise, that we can have that healthy marsh. And that's what we're doing with these reefs, is we're trying to build that healthy edge. And, Gold Bug is just one project. We've got numerous projects, but I'd say that's one example of the work that we're doing that is doing well. And we continue to see a forward progression.
Thank you, Joy. This is not a question, but it's a comment. Lisa Allen, one of the organizers of Beaufort Green Drinks, wanted everyone to know that today is Giving Tuesday. This is an interesting question. David, are there still tracts of land in the Ace Basin that need protecting?
Yeah, there's still a handful left. We're excited. We're working on a really great project. We hope to close in the next couple months of 2,000 acres of really in the heart of the Ace Basin. I think we've gotten the critical mass needed. We're not going to see any widespread, any kind of land conversion. So I think the land base is really stable, but there's still some pieces we'd like to see protected. They might take another decade over time, but I think slowly each year we start to get more and more. And it's really, what started as a very modest project of maybe 70,000 is, we just hit 300,000 a few years ago. So it's caught on.
Thank you. All right, so we have a question about this composite map. What are the green areas in the Port Royal Sound watershed map? What are those areas mean, David?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't do a good job explaining that map. So that's basically like a heat signature map where red is the most important priorities for things like water quality and most likely to flood. And so you're seeing lower watershed issues. Yellow is the next tier for priorities, and green would be the lowest. So green would be the least important for protecting water quality over the long term in the watershed.
All right, thank you. All right, so this is another question about the oyster reefs and asking, where do we get the oyster shells? Joy, are you still on the call? You might take this one.
Yep. Okay. I was having problems unmuting myself. Can everyone hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. So the question was, where do I get my oyster shells?
Yeah, where do you get the oyster shells?
So for the few projects that we have built that have recycled shell in them, there's a gentleman down in Port Royal that had some shell that he would sell to me already bagged. But I'm not sure if he's still doing that. But that is one concern that we have with the living shoreline permit that is about to be established. Right now, the Department of Natural Resources is already having an issue, I'll say, with getting shell. So while they have a great recycling program to get shell from restaurants and from groups of people that have, oyster roast, they still are buying shell every year. And so with the living shoreline permit that's coming online, hopefully in the next year or so, that's one thing that we're thinking about will maybe create an issue as far as competing interest for the shell. And so that's why we've tried developing a lot of the projects that we've done utilizing other resources and other substrates. So we have, while we have built a couple of reefs with dried shell, and we partnered with DNR to build some reefs with dried shell, we've been looking at other things like the oyster castles, like dried bamboo, which is an invasive species. If you cut it down and dry it, it sometimes can make a great great resource to grow oysters on, especially if you dip it in concrete. So so there is some shell out there, but it is definitely a limiting resource. So it's hard to find.
Okay, but let's make sure they understand that the oyster castles and the hard substrates that we place in the marsh are just that. They're just places for oysters to grow on, correct?
Correct. Yes, yes. So we are what we call substrate limited in South Carolina, where places like in the Chesapeake, they would have to build a reef and put oysters on it to help it probably. We just have to build the substrate, the reef, and then the oysters populate themselves. So that's normally what we're doing when we put things like the oyster castles out there. We're just creating the shape, and the oysters come and live on it naturally by themselves.
All right, thank you. All right, so we have a question for Dale. She wants to know where you're from in North Carolina.
I've lived in Raleigh for most of my adult life. I grew up in Union County, North Carolina, which was right across the state line from South Carolina. So I grew up very close to South Carolina border. But I went to NC State for college and pretty much stayed in the Raleigh area. Love it, but everybody asks me, are you coming back? And I'm going, no, I love it here. I live in the Mount Pleasant area right outside of Charleston now. And it's going to be really hard to pry me out of South Carolina. I'm sorry. I love it here. Absolutely love it.
Well, thank you. We've answered most of the questions in the chat. I think it's a good opportunity to wrap things up and thank everybody for coming.
Yes, absolutely.
Being with us.
Thank you, Matt, because today is Giving Tuesday, as someone mentioned, and you can see why we have so much fun going out with Joy and learning. The question was asked, what else can you do? Tell somebody about all of us who are working in conservation in South Carolina. Talk about the Nature Conservancy. Also, it's the year end, so and it's Giving Tuesday, so please take advantage of the opportunity to have your gift matched one-to-one by generous donor up through December 31st. Your support does mean so much to us. Also, we're gonna, this was recorded and it should be sent out to everyone. But if you will share, don't keep the bread basket for yourself. If you would share, we would really appreciate that. Again, stay in contact with us. Find an excuse to get out on the water with me. Joy, she's probably going, I can only have her in that boat so many times, but there's so many opportunities and so many things to learn. One of the other important notes is how many partners and volunteers we've had on these projects, especially our Living Shoreline projects. Thank you, Joy. So think about telling somebody about us, telling somebody about our projects, and connecting with us. That's the best thing. And also, thank you so much. And Matt and David, thank you so much for really helping us have this dialogue. And Kayla, thank you. Cheers. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa. We love our magazine. I probably have one right here. If you don't get the magazine, join us. You will. It's beautiful. We have an exit poll for you. Thank you so much. Please take the exit poll on your way. And thank you so much.